We're here in DeLand to speak to Stetson University Professor Emeritus Dr. Bobby Adams about his journey to become a band director. You took kind of an unusual path to become a band director. What were your earliest connections with music?
Yes, I think my story is a little odd or different or whatever, and that doesn't make it better than, it just makes it different than. But I was born in very rural West Kentucky, and there was just hardly any culture there at all that has to do with learning and music and that. And so my mother played piano mostly by ear, but could read enough to play church hymns. And she was teaching my older brother piano lessons, and so I would stand there and watch, and I could learn it faster than he did. And then he didn't have interest, and I continued. And so that was early in my life, and so she was my connection to music. And she, when anything ever came through, which was hardly ever, then she would take me. But I always knew that she was interested because she would listen to me practice some and that kind of thing, and got me set up with the little old lady down the street, teacher in this town of 300. But that was fine. And so we had, this 1 through 12 school I attended in the little town had no music teachers at all, never have had and never had any since. The school is now closed. But in the county seat, 10 miles away, there was a 100-piece high school band, and I got connected with two of the horn players that had moved temporarily to the little town where I was, and they said I should go talk to Mr. Combs, who was their band director. So that summer, between my freshman and sophomore year, my mother, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I mean, we went up there, and the band room was kind of downstairs under the auditorium stage or whatever. But he was coming out with a music dealer who'd stopped by there, and he saw us, and she said to him to ask if he was Mr. Combs, and he said yes. And so she told him why we were there, and as a surprise to both of us, he just turned around and took us to his office. He didn't say, wait a minute, or can you come tomorrow, or whatever. And so then he gave me, in the next month or two, 4 or 5 trumpet lessons. And so the first band I ever heard I was playing in, but we had all these little kids, and here this big kid down at the end of the row, he can't hardly play, but that was his method. Pop him in there and he'll get it, and I did. And so he really took an interest in me, both as a music person, as a person. He took me on numbers of trips that we went on, some related to bands, some not. He went to see his brother in Cincinnati, so he took me, and so I don't know, maybe he just needed company, but he was a real influence in my life. And so he's the one that I left high school at the end of my junior year to go to Western Kentucky to be a music major, and he helped me do all that, which was not a good idea, but that's what I did. And I was piano major, and that was immediately a bad experience. And so I dropped out, but I transferred to Morehead State in Kentucky, Western Kentucky State in Bowling Green, was because the president of Morehead had been my elementary principal. He was from our little community, and my older brother was there, and so my dad thought older brother could watch over younger brother who didn't study a lot, and of course, that didn't work. I changed majors, I don't know, 4 or 5 times. But anyway, I did not do music after I had that bad experience at Western. And so I was at Moorhead 2.5 or 3 years and decided to take piano lessons just because that's what I do sometimes. So then they recruited me into the school, a small department. And then that got me going. And so I got probably the smallest music degree anybody. It's about 30 hours of music. It's usually all piano, organ, theory, and stuff. But anyway, I did graduate, and then by that time I was married and had a child. And Carnegie Hall wasn't calling to see when I would be available, and so I had to get a job, and I got my wife at that time. Her father they were from Southern Indiana, and he certainly didn't want a son-in-law and a child living at his house, so he helped find me a job where he used to live. So that was another going back into a 1 through 12 schoolhouse where I taught all the band, whatever it was, probably 2 classes, maybe 3. Chorus, general music, elementary music. I did one class a day, one for the first grade, every day I go. Mm-hmm. Also taught 10th grade commercial math and 9th grade business math. And I'd flunked college algebra 2 or 3 times, but it didn't seem to matter there. But anyway, I did that for 3 years, and I had not studied to be a band director. I did not know the literature. I did not know the pedagogy of the instruments. I bought books and read and thought and would go to a workshop, but they didn't have an FBA up there like what we have here. They had the Indiana Music Educators, but that didn't compare with what goes on at FMEA. I mean, it was just, and I was out in that town by myself. I didn't get any literature from anybody. So at the end of the 3rd year, I got another job in northern Indiana through a friend of mine that I was at Moorhead with. And I went up there, and there was a consolidation fight, so immediately that went to pieces. But it was a good little band, and I learned a lot from that. So the trustee at Clear Spring, he couldn't find a music teacher while I was gone, so he called me and said, would you come back? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, well, I'll double your salary if you come back. And I said, well, don't hang up the phone on me. But I told him, I said, you've got to let me try to learn how to be a band director. You're going to have to buy some instruments and equipment. So the first year I'm back, what little group of people were left, plus what then I would start as beginners, I took them to the Indiana State Band Festival, made superior rating. Then did again the next year. But that school was closing because Indiana was under a reorganization plan, and every school either had to have a certain tax base and population, or they had to close and consolidate with another. And so this school was on the rail, but I couldn't get another job. It's different than what Florida is. I mean, I lived in the town of Brownstown, 3,000 people, and the band director was there. That's the only job he ever had. He got it right out of college, stayed there his whole career. And that's the way all those small town bands think. You just didn't have turnover back then, nothing like what it is here. So anyway, I was just fraught with what are we going to do? And so my parents had moved to Fort Myers, and I came down to visit them in the summer. And my dad told me that in Florida, they have to go out into other states to recruit teachers, not just band directors, but teachers. And he said, you should go down to the courthouse where the education offices are, and there's a music supervisor down there, and so you ought to go see him. And this is interesting because I just visited him a couple of months ago at his 90th birthday party. And it was so much fun. And a lot of people that hear this, like Roy Carter, he'll know Bob Brodiker by name. He knew him, but anyway, he was now the music supervisor. So I didn't even know hardly what a music supervisor was, but I walked in there and he said, what can I do for you? And I said, well, I'm down visiting my dad, and he thought I should check. I said, I'm teaching in Indiana, and my school is getting ready to close, and I'm just having a heck of a time finding a job. And Brodiker said, well, where in Indiana are you from, or where you been living? And I said, well, just a dinky little town that you never heard of. And he said, well, just try me. Mm-hmm. I said, it's Brownstown, Indiana. And he said, yeah, I'm from there. Yeah. And his uncle owned the weekly newspaper, and he had been reading about this Clear Spring band doing all this big stuff. And so he didn't have a job right then, but that was the summer before the famous teacher strike in Florida, where nearly all the teachers went on strike. And so I had one more year that I could do up there before that school closed. So I was up there, and I got a phone call. I didn't have an office. I didn't have a phone, but the one phone in the principal's office, they came down and interrupted band and said, you got a long-distance call. You know, that's the way it was, man. So it was Brodiker, and he said, do you want the North Fort Myers job? And I said, absolutely. I'll be there just as quick as I can get there. So he recruited me down there, and that was one of the really important pivotal spots in my life, because that was a real band program. I mean, it was a fairly, the school opened as a junior high, and then they phased in each grade. But by the time I got there, all of them were in there, but it was still a fairly new school, just five, and it had a nice band room and storage like real places, you know, and we had football schedule. I never done marching band, you know, and I did not know necessarily that the field was 100 yards long. I don't know. I just never thought about it. And so anyway, I had to do that. But that put me in the company of R.T. Kirk, who was the band director at Fort Myers High School, and he was such a dedicated admirer or fan, or whatever you want to call it, of FBA. And so he took me to meetings and conventions, and he would tell me, well, that's Charles Cornby standing right over there, and that's Lewis Jones standing over there, and Oliver Hobbs. And he would tell me about those people and what they'd done, and I felt like I was, you know, in a candy store or something. It was just, but on the other hand, I was also intimidated because I knew what I didn't know. I mean, I knew how much I didn't know. But coupled with that, I came there in the fall of '68, and that's the same year that Jack Crew came to Riverview from Plant City. And so Jack was an incredible person and a personality, and it took me a good long while to get to know him, but I learned who he was in district meetings, because about 60 miles between Fort Myers and Sarasota before the day of the interstate. You know, it took 3 days to get up there and stuff. But anyway, Jack was a great influence on me because you know, even though I was excited about so much, but yet I thought, when are these people going to figure out that I don't know anything? You know, I don't know anything. I mean, the first several years I played both required numbers because I didn't know what else was out there, you know. It's hard to make up time. So anyway, Jack, but he was always enthused and excited. And he liked the sound of my band once I got it developed, but I knew his band sound was better than mine. And I thought, well, I'm going to hang out with Jack. And so when I moved from Fort Myers after 6 years, and I was making ones a state, and my marching band was big, but I moved to Bradenton and started a new high school at Bayshore High School, so I could be next door to Jack and across the bay from Croft and UCF. And whereas that experience. I was supposed to have like 70 kids. I still have the list downstairs. Well, I got there were 27, and they were all potential criminals or idiots or what. I changed their behaviors quite a bit. But anyway, it was a rough go. And I thought, I've destroyed my life, But anyway, that kind of intensity, the next year, there from the middle school, I had a 60-piece band fully instrumented. And that year, just because I was desperate, I made straight ones at marching, and that's the first time they'd had a marching band ever. And made in district, I made a split one. Jack Williams said because I should learn to conduct with a baton. So, but then at state with Ravelli judging, I made straight ones at state, and then every solo ensemble I had at district and state made a superior. And but yet my physical and mental resources were blown. But anyway, I developed that program, and it got pretty good. And so in 5 years, I got a call from Jeff Bradford, and he said, "You want the Leon job?" And I said, "Well, in fact, I do." And so I took off up there, and I did not know that at that time Leon was not as healthy as it had been in past years. It was down a little bit. And so I had that facing me, but it came back fast, and all that tradition's there, and Oliver was still there. He was a great inspiration to me. He was down there with me just about all the time, and he never really taught me anything with words or nothing, didn't advise me, nothing. But I learned to hear what he didn't say. If he didn't mention the clarinets after so long, I thought I better look at that, But, and plus he was like R.T. Kirk. He was so much for me. He just believed in me. And it showed all the time. And so we became so close. I had so much fun with him, and was interested to be there. And of course, Jeff Bradford, you know Jeff, and he loved to poke it to me by he is saying, Adams, he said, the worst thing I ever did was hire you to come up here to be a band director, same town I'm in, But that was as all that time. I mean, I was on the board many times. While I was at Leon, I was president of FBA. And you gradually edge into the water a little deeper, a little deeper, a little deeper, and then you become a part of it. And then you, as a leader, you kind of take ownership of it, and then you start thinking you know more than other people. Don't vote on that. So, but anyway, that was all thrilling and reinforcing, but always hard work, So Leon at that time did not have a good feeder program at all. And unless I've lost my mind, I'm sure there was one year there that every low brass player there had come into that school on a different instrument. I mean, I had to build it. But then the good news was that drew from a community in Fort Myers that had a lot of college professors' kids, and the stable part of Fort Myers, the historic start, where there was a lot of tradition. I mean, I had kids in the band, their grandparents, I guess, were in the band, And so that motivated me. In all my other schools, we were kind of the other school, Well, here we were the school. And also, even to this day, that was, at that time, the winningest high school I've ever heard of. We had swimmers on the swimming team. It seemed like no one knew. They lived in apartments and had their own cars and stuff. So, you can deduct a little bit of stuff from that. And also, if you, and I don't remember ever doing this, but I would tell people, if I were to ever screw up and not get the buses ordered, I call the principal, and I wouldn't have to listen to a 10-minute chewing. He would just get busy and get me some buses, and there'd be nothing said about it. Because they wanted everybody to win. We had the winningest football coach in the history of the state at that time, and Ray Kicklighter did an incredible job with the chorus, a huge program, and band and basketball. Latin club, everything was, and that motivated. I loved being part of that, and to this day. When I drive up that hill where you see Leon, I get goosebumps to this day. And if I said, if the one biggest thing, because I always felt like I was down here and had always been down here, and when I got that job, I thought, I can't believe this. Here I am, where? At Leon High School, man. And so it still motivates me to this day.
Well, do you have words of wisdom or advice you can pass to future directors or to young directors?
Well, the thing that, I've learned by being a parent and doing other things, you can't get people to do something until they're kind of ready for it. But you can still plant the seeds of advice. I knew more about practicing before I really got into it, practicing, you know what I mean? But anyway, what I would say to the young band directors is time is precious, and the sooner you commit yourself to being a musician and a teacher and just learning everything you can about it, don't put it off. And on the other hand, though, don't burn yourself out. Don't go at it, till your family starts leaving and you go crazy and all that stuff. You gotta have balance in your life. But what we short on so much in band profession today is commitment. They just it's harder to find people. When I decided to be a band director, I could not go ahead then after I was out of music that period of time, and I got a major in history and a minor in political science, just out fooling around. But when I did go back, that was the only choice I had. I couldn't sing. I still can't sing, so I couldn't do a choir. And like I said, I didn't have a professional career looking at me. And so that was my opportunity. And even though I hate to say it to band directors, but my band was always in my head, my orchestra, because I fell in love with the literature of orchestras. When I started teaching band, I still didn't know what band music was. I didn't know Henry Fillmore or Charlie Carter or Paul Yoder. I didn't know all that stuff, see? So the first time I was through the FBA list, I was introduced to band music. I thought, well, what is that? Because it's mostly modern. Even though it can be melody, but it's still, compared to the William Tell Overture and Man and Veen, that's, So I fell in love with that literature, and I'd seen in movies and things orchestra conductors where I hadn't seen band. So, it wasn't I was trying to pretend it like that, but that was the model for me. And it was when I was at Leon, because Oliver chose band when he was in Kansas. He had both, and very big and very fine. But at the end, he chose band because he said, I just love the sonority of the band. And then I got there too. As much as I love still this day, 90% of my recordings are the classic orchestral things, but I would not trade band for orchestra now at all. And also I think I can make a band more instantly responsive than I can string players. And a few years ago I did the 9th and 10th grade all-state orchestra, and we played, no arrangement of it, but we played the first movement of the Sibelius Third Symphony. And I was taking a big risk, but let me tell you, those string players, they came in, they could play it. I'd spent all my time trying to get the winds to get the style and the this, and of course they're playing them one on the part. But those strings could just do it. Well, when they can just do it, they're not as responsive to nuance. I've found for me. But winds, you can do them like you can voices, just whatever. So where was I going with that?
You were giving advice to young directors.
Right. Yes. The thing, I think it's also because there's evidence to betray what I'm getting ready to say. There are some people come out of the college and they hit the ground running and get success real fast. But I think that's a mistake, because what it takes to be a musician is more than learning how to teach a band to play technically. And that's what so many people do, is just technique. But the music is something else. And it comes about through your ability to interpret and teaching them how to interpret, so that a phrase says something rather than they say, well, the phrases are well shaped. Well, yeah, that's like step one. What's the line trying to say? And when I go out and rehearse bands, some of the best bands in the state, I've stopped and said, like the First Flute, is that what you want that line to do? And they say, like, well, what do you mean? It's half notes, whole notes, quarter notes, stuff. And I said, yeah, but it has inner, it has soul, In some of my writings, I love to tell the quote of Ernest Hemingway talking about great literature. He said, which is, same difference. He said, great literature, he said, it's like an iceberg. It's like 20% is above the surface, but the 80% is below the surface. And that's the part that's important. And to get those kids into that lower level, then you have to be a musician to do that. And then when you do that and you hear the technical bands, you think, oh, I'm so sorry. Because those kids have worked hard and they can play at amazing level of technical speed. But the music is not, in my opinion, not happening.
Well, you made the reference to literature, both musical literature and written literature. And I know that your book is in its final stages. Could you tell us a bit about the book?
Well, thank you for asking. Well, I was kind of jumping the gun, because that's basically what the book is about. It's about the musical approach to teaching music versus the technical approach. And I describe both of those. The musical approach, you have to have technique developed, but you develop it in a context of musical terms. Everything you do, every time you blow a note, you either just blow a note or you play a note. And it's all about hearing, and it's all about that level. I can give you an example. When I was in high school, way back when, my bands played beautifully on the field. They had these gorgeous sounds, and I sound like I'm bragging, but everybody else, Jack will take that. Jack's the authority on sound. But during the fourth quarter, when they've had their break and the game is at the end and everybody's wanting to just have fun and rock and roll, no. You always play with a good sound. You always play. I was not going to let poor playing be the reward for the good playing that they have done. And I said, you can have just as much fun or more playing well than you can up there blowing your heads off. So I always had that, what I call a musical discipline in them. You don't ever play without listening and, compromise. Group performance is all about compromise. You can't say, well, I'm in tune. No, nobody cares. You got to be in tune with all these other people here, And so the book, it could have been titled, well, this is the way I did it, But I developed whatever I developed by learning from other people. If it hadn't been for Jack, I would never have achieved whatever I've achieved. because he had that concept of sound in him. And I knew, for example, I mean, as beautiful as my sound was, it was only beautiful in a dynamic range like this. But music's got to have a wide dynamic range. So I didn't know how to make them sound good when they played full. So I didn't let them play full. You know, the crowd would get just as quiet when my band played because they wanted to hear it. They had to get quiet to hear it, particularly at North Fort Myers, where I learned from Jack. So, where was I going with that?
We're in the book.
We're in the book, yes. So, I mean, the book then covers all the fundamentals that you use, that it's all about, and again, it's not easy to get all it, but it's all about interpreting, because it's not just you that's interpreting. You've got to teach them to interpret. And if they are indeed interpreting, I mean, I list them in the book as co-interpreters. And an example that you can do of that, if you have, I used example, I've used 2 or 3 things, but one is ballroom dancing competitively by man and woman. And the man is the leader. He is the interpreter. He is the one that's setting that up. But if she doesn't know as well as he does what he's doing, and be able to respond to him at the intuitive level, that's where you don't think, you just do it. And you already know, but yet he's going to be the one to adjust the moves, and if that didn't work smoothly, then this one, music is not fixed in time. And I can't get over the people that want to fix it in time. And one of the examples I use is, how many people would play tennis if all they did is stand in one spot and go, pop, pop? The fun's in the strategy. Plus, you don't know how fast that ball is coming across the net, or where it's coming, or how much spin it's got. Well, no one can play even one note the way exactly I would play it, right? And so since they can't do that, but that's what I've got to have them do. And so you have to get them so in tune to you and know what you're doing, and then respond to it. Because if I do this, if they take them, what do you mean by that? Too late, right? I mean, it has to be, and so they have to be co-interpreters. Well, for them to be co-interpreters, they have to be on task 100% of the time. And that's what I say about them. I mean, it's like walking the wire. 1 second off, bam, could be, And so the book is all about how you make music and how you teach kids how to make music. And I see the technical approach as the enemy, but so many people can get so much success by doing that. I mean, their recording will get them into Midwest before any of mine will, because I don't ever let that piece fix. Sound moves in time, right? Anything that moves cannot be fixed. But you get the variable, it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And often the audience can't tell how much you're doing with that line, but they do. And also there's something about that comes off more musical to that audience. And one is having those performers that on task and that committed and taking chances, So lots of stuff in that book.
Oh, sounds like a book I'm looking forward to reading. Do you have one short story that could demonstrate how satisfactory your career has been, or what fun your career has been?
Well, it's been more satisfactory than it has been fun, because, I had somebody ask me one time when I had that little bitty band in rural Indiana, and half the band was 6th graders or something. And they said, now how does that compare to the Stetson Band or the Southern Winds or whatever? And I said, really, if you can believe that, it's really not different. In at least my way of thinking, because when I go before a group, I don't know exactly what it's going to be. And I've got to do everything I can do to get that band to come alive, and the music and the piece and whatever. So you're always, as all of you say, well, you're doing it the best you can do it. You're trying to get something that's not there to be there. And so that, what was I going with that?
You were telling us a story.
Yeah.
About the life of a band director.
Right. Yeah. So I started by saying that it was more. It was never fun for me. I mean, the association with band directors and the FBA, that was great fun. But the work, I was always so serious about it. And those kids, again, could never get it, ever, the way I want it. And a little story, I'll tell you about that. I learned this well, I'll skip that. But anyway, if you do the transfer, how the music is, if I tell them, if you go for men, if you go to a men's store and they try a coat on you, what's the first thing you will do? You'll make it your coat. Mm-hmm. Well, I've got to do that to the music or it's not mine, right? When people go in to sit down, first thing they do is they adjust their chair a little bit. Well, then how can you not want the music to be yours? And one little lesson from that, should have written that name down. He was a great writer. He wrote a book on creativity that I read, and he told a story about an artist who, like many artists who are starving, he would teach adult classes, whatever. So this was his new at this, and he had the painters all sitting around. There was a basket of flowers down there, and he said, I could not understand how they could all be so different. And then he said, I finally figured it out. When they look and see the basket of flowers, they don't see what I see. But when I taught them to see what I see, then they all painted alike in what I would paint. And that's the same thing with music. My job with them is to get them to hear what I hear. When they hear what I hear, they will play what I hear, or really close to it, And I'm lost again. I don't know what's happening. Where was I?
Well, you were telling us stories, and you're doing a grand job of it.
Right. If are we still with young band directors?
We're always with young directors, but we're just telling stories.
Yeah. Now. Yeah, I guess the satisfaction of it. I mean, accomplishment does reinforce. I mean, I was a really shy, timid, lack of confidence kid. I mean, I was terrible, and so I have dealt with, and I didn't even know what this was until within the last year or two. I wrote an article in the FBA Journal on this. We talk about kids with stage fright and that holds them up and messes them stuff. So I talked about and how to concentrate and how to get your mind off yourself. But then I drew from Montaigne, the French late 1500. He was he's the guy that is credited with inventing the essay. Montaigne said, and the term is translated, so there could be more than one, that he had what he identified as soul error, E-R-R-O. Mm-hmm. And he says, he says it so much better in the essay than I can say it, but he was rich, probably one of the richest people in France, had inherited from his father this huge estate with a castle-like house, and he was he had lunch or dinner with the king and all. I mean, he was at the top of the pyramid, and he says, I know that my house is better than my neighbor's, but simply because that is my neighbor's house, his house is better to me